Namaste and good morning, everyone. I, Ritika Gupta, Senior Assistant Director at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabha Vevamedi Anusandhan Sansthan, extend my heartiest welcome to you all to IMPRI #Web Policy Learning. Today, we are here on the last day of a 3-day online certificate training program on disaster resilient waste management for sustainable spaces. This program is being organized by National Institute of Disaster Management at Ministry of Home Affairs with Government of India, with IMPRI Center for Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development. I would now like to request Ms. Nishi Verma, who is Research Program Officer at IMPRI, to take the proceedings forward. Ma'am, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ritika, and very good morning to everyone. I'm Nishi Verma, Research Program Officer at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute. I hope that you all and your loved ones are keeping safe and healthy in these difficult times. I welcome you to day 3 of 3-day online certificate training program on disaster resilient waste management for sustainable spaces, jointly being organized by National Institute of Disaster Management, Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India, and IMPRI Center for Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development, New Delhi. Disasters often generate large quantity of waste that threaten public health, hinder rescue and reconstruction efforts, and may significantly damage overall recovery efforts and negatively impact the environment. Safe handling, removal, and management of disaster waste are therefore important issues in disaster response and recovery. Unfortunately, current disaster management practice often involves either no action or improper action, but also learns and adapts in order to anticipate and act before such waste is garnered. Since Indian cities are experiencing a population explosion due to both migration and natural increase, hence technical know-how needs to be stitched onto social system to sustain and maintain initiatives. Recognition of local risk, including everyday risk emanating from environmental degradation, needs a wider understanding by stakeholders at all levels. Therefore, as scholars, practitioners, and policymakers, we need to take a step forward to understand the background issue and objectively analyze them to come out with best ways possible towards disaster resilient waste management for achieving the objective of sustainable development. This 3-day online training certificate program precisely aims to do this. The patron for the program is Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, Executive Director, NIDM New Delhi. Our conveners include Professor Anil Kumar Gupta, Head ECDRM NIDM New Delhi, Dr. Simi Mehta, CEO and Editorial Director, IMPRI. We will also be joined by Dr. Indra Khurana, Senior Expert Water Sector, who will also be moderating the session. I'm sure you all must have gained a lot from last sessions with our expert, Dr. Brijesh Dubey, Associate Professor, IIT Kharagpur, Ms. Swati Singh Sambyal, Waste Management Specialist, UN Habitat India, Professor Sunil Pandey, Director TERI, Energy and Resource Institute, Professor Shamal Mani, Senior Advisors, Public Health Foundation of India, Mr. Arshad Berde, Director Swachh Pune, and Professor Anil Kumar Gupta, Head ECD. In today's session, I would like to share with you the housekeeping announcements again. Please join the meeting on time and ensure at least 80% attendance of the 3-day online training course for obtaining certificates. There is allotment of 15 to 20 minutes for question and answers after each lecture by our eminent experts, and the questions will be moderated by me to ensure that they are answered in the best possible way. Hence, please feel free to write your questions on Q&A box only and not on chat box, posting it by your name and not as an anonymous attendee. Also, please keep the questions precise and refrain from making any general comments to save time and learn more from this certificate training program. The videos are being posted on our Facebook and YouTube channel, whose details will be posted here. Now, I would like to welcome the first speaker of our session, our special address to her, Professor Jyoti Parikh, Executive Director, Integrated Research for Action Development, IRADE. Professor Jyoti is Executive Director of Research and Action for Development, IRADE, New Delhi. She was a member of the Prime Minister's Advisory Panel on Climate Council from 2008 to 2014. She was a recipient of Nobel Prize given to IPCC authors in 2007. She was also co-recipient of Zayed Prize given to Millennium Assessment authors. She served as senior professor at Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, Mumbai. She also worked at the International Institute for Applied System Analysis, Austria, and served as senior energy consultant at the Planning Commission, New Delhi. She was a visiting professor at the Institute of Advanced Sciences of UNU, Tokyo, from 1995 to 96. She was the acting director of IGIDR from 1997 to 98. She has experience of nearly 40 years on energy and environment problems of the developing countries. Her publications include nearly 200 project research papers and 25 books and monographs in the area of energy economics, climate change and modeling, energy technology assessment, rural energy, power sector, environment economics, natural resource management, and climate change. She has served as energy consultant to the World Bank, the US Department of Energy, European Economic Community, Brussels, and UN agencies such as UNIDO, FAO, UNU, and UNESCO. Climate consultant, environmental consultant to UNDP, World Bank, and so on. Welcome, ma'am, and to IMPRI, hashtag Web Policy Learning, and over to you.
So thank you very much for inviting me. I've been attending partially from time to time and see that the discussions are very active and very encouraging. Both NIDM has a long role in building capacity, and capacity building is one of the major lacuna that we have. Now, let me after congratulating and thanking you, let me say that now we all know that, this is the presentation. Can we make it off right now, or shall we?
You can see the presentation.
Yeah, no, I'm talking now just in general before.
So yes, I'm stopping. No problem.
Yeah. Disasters are increasing, and we need to be increasingly ready to face it. And we have also seen the results of what happens when we make systemic changes. And some of you may have seen the documentary on Discovery Channel on Bhuj, and that really was the beginning. Bhuj earthquake on 26 January was the beginning of getting serious about disaster resilience, and NDMA was set up, National Disaster Management Authority, and there were many things followed, NIDM and all these research, all these training programs and so on. These protocols are developed, and alert systems, rescue teams are being trained. And we have seen the results of it in many places. We have seen, for example, Odisha itself, that there were, I think, 10,000 deaths in the one cyclone, and now later on, recently several cyclones have happened. We have seen that that hardly results deaths in 2 digits and not 4 or 5 digits numbers. We have also seen that the disaster frequency is increasing. This is the first time that in the same week we had a cyclone in the East Coast and cyclones in the West Coast, and West Coast cyclones were not so common earlier, but now we are not sure that it is a beginning of a new trend or not. So we need to be prepared, and all our systems have to go through shake up, and it is going through that. So we have been working in this, you mentioned many areas, but urban development and disaster resilience is also one of my very active areas. And recently, I mean, it's 2019 and to 20, more like 20 beginning, we had a UN conference on climate change. And we also presented there how much work India has done and what is India's approach in the Indian government pavilion. So we can probably start with that now. Can we have the PowerPoint, please? Yeah. Next one. I'm mentioning cities now because we, after Bhuj earthquake, we have a state disaster management authorities in every state, and also nationally we are prepared. We know how to send forces and so on. Now we are getting ready at the city level. Now we have seen what has happened very frequently in Mumbai, in Srinagar, in Chennai, in Kanpur. You may have heard stories about these cities and what had happened. So now there is also a resolve that the cities have to be disaster resilient, because once anything happens in the city, it affects millions simultaneously. There is no time for hospitals to get ready, for roads to get ready, and so on. So it is far more critical in a small space. So many people are trapped, and there is no, and their city means a lot of urban services. It means water supply, electricity supply, waste management, and telecom, and so on. So many supplies get simultaneously also affected. So there is a need for that very quickly. But some of the things I'm saying there is also relevant for states and countries. So I'll skip some slides, but then some are relevant here. Next. I think the Smart Cities mission provides for redevelopment of cities with city renewals, old slum areas, core city areas. That's the main problem. Core city areas are so old that how to ensure modern services there is a big problem. Retrofitting projects and greenfield projects where cities are expanded in certain different areas and new suburbs are being developed, satellite towns, integrated townships, just like we had Noida some time back. Noida was not so active, and so on. So in all these places, giving 24-hour service is a big issue, and this is why smart solutions are very important. Next. So what are the important areas? So we have solid waste management on top here. Stormwater drainage. There are township town planning rules about having 20% on both sides. The place to drain out and underneath there are drainage systems. But it's very difficult to maintain these kind of norms which are necessary. We have wastewater, sewerage, water supply. So these are, and there, of course, there are other things which are also close to relevant to this, although it may seem like energy, for example, you know that first thing that happens is electricity supply goes away. And we also know that electricity, it can also cause electrocution, and so it's a safety issue as well. And it's very difficult to work in the dark if these things happen in the dark. So urban mobility is challenged when this happens, especially there are blockage, there are fallen trees and so on. So to get to the hospital, have the ambulance moving freely, these are the problems that happen. And we will make about 2 lakh crore investments into this. Next. Next. I think next. So IRADe, my organization, we as I said, we work a lot on urban development issue. In fact, we did a first, even in the PM Council and the Climate Council, this is the one I had created the background work for this, and also we followed up immediately after this with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. And we have done work in 32 cities in 19 Indian states to see what kind of first rapid assessment was necessary, which cities have what kind of problems, and we found that, yeah, okay, next. Next. We found that we need to do vulnerability assessment, develop vulnerability index and roadmap for climate resilient cities, and also policy landscape for climate resilience, not only for one city, but across the cities. Now, disaster resilience we need to do not only in city as a whole, but board-wise we should know what can happen, where are the low-lying areas, where are the critical infrastructure located, where are hospitals, where are schools, and how to empty out the schools. Disaster management strategies, disaster resilience action plan, and then health resilience is this more into, we are going into climate change now, but heat stress, dengue management, air pollution action plan, and so on. This is a little comprehensive approach, but I'll focus only on the disaster part. Soon I'll come to also solid waste management. Next. Next. So in terms of disaster resilience, next. 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 We have seen that, Andhra Pradesh incurred economic losses, $7 billion due to cyclone Hudhud, and city of Visakhapatnam was the worst. Economic losses from floods in Kashmir, Srinagar was also high, and 3.6 million people got affected. Chennai was in 2015, Srinagar was 2014, and total losses in Kerala also is supposed to be 4 billion according to the World Bank. And so in a poor country, these frequent losses, kind of take away all the development we have made. And many people have gathered belongings after very long and hard work, and then they disappear in a matter of days or even hours and minutes. So it is very critical for a poor country, especially, to be disaster resilient, and we need to have capacity building. And if the capacity building are at every level, including citizens level. Next. So we have, in India, floods are, if you count the disasters, events wise, floods is the main thing. And many times floods is not just a matter of disaster, but it's of poor planning as well. And very often things break down because they were not so good to start with. So there were some inherent systemic flaws before the disaster strikes. So at least that part, that much if we can do and not let it happen, then you can minimize disaster very much better, especially if the building codes are followed, if the town planning rules are followed, and so on. So we have the multi-hazard issues are also there, which is the next. So we had developed that time something called HIGS Framework, and what we found is that, let's say you have hazards of the physical and meteorological type, and city has a certain temperature, maximum, minimum precipitation, and so on. So according to those parameters, the city should be prepared to face the disaster. So H is for hazard, but I is for infrastructure. Infrastructure, water supply, storage system, solid waste management. G is for governance, participatory governance, transparency governance, accountability. Accountability is when the funds have to quickly flow and be there where they are needed. And where they are needed is requires certain efficiency in the system and less red tapes, and yet honesty enough to get the work done. So response efficiency and capability, innovative financing for such investments. And socioeconomic indicators is where this type of programs come, because if the citizens are aware and there is a demographic composition also, there is if the slum population is very high, if literacy rate and participation rate is low, then we have more problems. And how many migrants are there? Because migrants don't like to invest in where they work, where they stay. They think that it's a matter of short time and we'll manage, but then they don't make investments into where they live. So urbanization trend and urbanized sprawl is also an issue. Next. So we prepared this for the Ministry of Urban Development on climate resilient and 20 cities profile we prepared. And it covered different ecosystem types: coastal cities, hill cities, riverine cities based located on rivers, and dry zones like Rajasthan, and developed this framework and vulnerability matrix for this purpose. Next. So we have there are then ministry asked us to do even board-wise and planning. So as I was mentioning, city more into city disaster management plan, which is ward level. Next. And our plan was, due to our study, there was a smart city has a issue about how the all smart cities should be prepared for disasters. And here you can see so many multi-hazards are there. We have a hazard on the first column: landslides, floods, cyclones, water scarcity, heat wave, cold wave. And how the red ones are the highly vulnerable, green ones are mildly vulnerable, and 2 is intermediate, and NA means not applicable. So for example, Srinagar has no water scarcity or heat wave, but it is vulnerable in nearly 4 areas, and so on. So we have to prepare accordingly. And this is, I'm giving you the example of cities, but it is also relevant for states or districts and so on, where you do such an analysis and see which disaster and what frequency will strike. Next. So here the exposure. Now exposure also requires not only the as I mentioned, the HIGS framework, it also needs how many people are there, and so higher the number of population, higher the exposure. But exposure to earthquake, winds, and so on. So here are the levels of the different cities. You can see. So every city has, unfortunately, several types of. Be prepared for several types of hazards. Next. So here is what I meant by GIS-based planning, where every location has a vulnerability, where you can see, the purple area in brown area. You can't see the legend, but they are low-lying catchment areas in Hyderabad and in this is Srinagar. So how low the catchment areas are the ones where there will be much more water, and so we have to be prepared for the water flow going through the city in different directions, and its vulnerability. And also, as I mentioned later on, I might show location of hospitals, locations of I think in this itself there may be there locations of schools, because suddenly there are children there. Hospitals, patients are incapable of handling things, and moreover, people have to rush to the hospital, and if they are themselves located, then there is a problem. Next. Here we did also modeling work, simulation type of work, where we say, okay, if it is 28,000 cubic meter, which areas will be inundated? If it is 50% higher and 42,000 cubic meter, then how many areas will be submerged? And from these exercises, you do the city planning. And next. So we have to follow the response, recovery, and risk reduction. I'm sure over the last 2-3 days you heard that first in the first week or so, it's a rescue effort and so on. But after that, it's a recovery issue, and also risk reduction is the preparation, learning from our experience and preparation for the next or avoiding the next time it happens. We cannot control whether disaster happens or not, but we can certainly be prepared to face it and minimize the damage. So this is the different phases of planning, and updating building codes, zoning laws, and so on has to be done. I'll quickly come to the waste also next. I think it's also important that you, I think this is enough for this PowerPoint. We'll go to the other presentation, please. It is also important that waste management is not just an issue of, this is our friend, he works now at IRADe, and he managed the Srinagar, he was that time municipal commissioner there. He managed, he's retired there and now joins us. He was the one who managed this. 4 or 5 days, Srinagar was under water, and there was so much challenge of how to avoid epidemic. So with that tribute to him and thanks to him, I'll just show you a few picturesque things so you can get some idea of when things actually happen. You need 100 trucks and you need so many, you have to remove 1,000 dead bodies and so on of the animals. So we can quickly brush through it, not go through every slide, not every, but here is we'll go quickly because I will just show you some pictures. These are some statistics on floods in the past, and as you know, Srinagar is all waterways, works, Dal Lake, Nagini Lake, you must have heard, Jhelum. So it's all full of water bodies, and it's in the middle of that. So they are prepared for floods, but what happened in 2014 was something very amazing, and they were not quite prepared. And from now on, probably they are. Next, just quickly, next. I think you've seen this. It just shows where the water comes from. Next, next. So, yeah, next also. So here you can see, and just one before. So 77% of city was inundated, and gray ones is partially submerged, 20 to 40 fully submerged. So all that collects waste water of a different caliber, a different category, and they have to be, it's to be evacuated and cleaned, and the area has to be cleaned afterwards so it does not smell. So it's that water evacuation strategy, wastewater evacuation. I mean, I'm calling it waste because you know, it's lying in the street, but traditionally wastewater is the one which goes through the pipes. Okay, next. So where is it not flooded? Flooded, these kind of exercises, if you go through it, you can do, you know where the problems are and you are prepared for it. Next. Next. Yeah, so here is the, you know, over 1 lakh tons of waste and garbage over city, scattered around the city, dead animal carcasses in thousands, and you immediately needed disinfection umbrella and dewatering. Now, even their offices were submerged, their mobiles had not working. Employees were disconnected, where to call them, where to gather them, and who informs whom what. They were all also fighting for their own families, but they leave that aside and try to save the city. No connectivity, dewatering had to be done immediately. Next. So these are, next, I think these are. You can see also pictures of how things gather. Now all this garbage has to be removed. So they had to be prepared with the tender type of arrangements beforehand, and those trucks should be able to come in. That's the other thing. Even if some trucks are there to collect the garbage, they have to just start from somewhere and make their way. So they can't really reach everywhere to do this work. Next. So they had to make a roadside office and staff. They were working 24 hours almost. Staff had to be vaccinated first. And so these are all next. Next. So offices had to be located in several places and in not flooded areas, and quickly planning had to be done. So we can see Radio Kashmir had to get very active into this because radio is a little bit easier to get going. And next. So these are the heroes of the day, of course, but of the, I would say, decade. So this is a very difficult situation. I would now, I think that's it. So I would like to now go into bigger issues. Whenever we are talking about these fundamental issues which confront society, it's not just about measures. We have discussed measures, who collect garbage, how we should sort it at the house level, how it should be picked up, where it should go, where it's recycled. We have also talked about technologies of using this and recycling this and managing the waste. Then we make systemic changes, so measures, technologies, systemic changes. And systemic changes, by that one means that how to organize ourselves in such that we cause less damage, less garbage in the first place, and we also cause fundamental changes in our system. For example, now, right now, things are very tough because of COVID, and enormous amount of one-time use garbage is coming out. Now, we are thinking in terms of one-time garbage to actually, on one hand, we need it every day, and on the other hand, we say single-use plastic will be banned. I think instead of banning, we should put more technologies and single-use material, whatever it is, part paper, part something else, should be there should be more innovation, and single-use material should be biodegradable. That should be the condition to our scientists, to our technologists, that it can produce in affordable and large quantities of that material would be needed. And it could be many reasons, and especially health reasons, that these single-use plastics are used. And by banning, we are not solving then health problem or something else. So we need to think in terms of more research and more development. So I went from measures to technology to new technologies, and then one has to also think one bigger level, and that's the level of economy, society. And here the issue comes, I think you might have discussed the issue of circular economy, recycling economy. And every time any material is made and any any product is made, disposal has to be thought of. Right now, we have suddenly started a lot of new material. We are going through a lot of societal changes. We are using mobiles, we are using computers and networks, and also solar panels and so on. So each of these new line of materials which keep coming, we need to have a plan for its disposal, for its utilization, modernizing it, same thing again, and so on. After all, the earth has come with a limited amount of all resources, and quite a lot of it is non-renewable resource. I mean, the minerals and so on that go into mobiles and solar panels and so on. So we need to think in terms of reorganizing the society also, and behavioral change and civic responsibilities that we hope that programs like this create. And not only, I think that such a program, it not only creates aware citizens, but we hope that very innovative minds which will solve the problems in future, and they will engage into solving and creating solutions for which may be managerial, technological, lifestyle changes. And lifestyle changes, I would say, some of the lessons pandemic has taught us that one can do with fewer material, fewer things, fewer clothes, fewer shoes, and what have you. Everything less, and it's not impossible to do that. Secondly, we also saw, I'm just showing you the positive side of it in terms of our behavior. We also saw that when the mankind stops being so active as it was, suddenly the air gets clean and the birds start flying and the rivers look clean. You can see the Himalayan peaks and so on. So there is nature has a restorative ability, and it's just we have to not so continuous onslaught from mankind is not something that it can keep taking. And we need to look at this in a holistic perspective, where things start from a home to the technology, to the society, to the reorganization of our behavior, and everything has to fall in place so that we handle not only the solid waste problem, but many other problems that relate to our health and well-being. Thank you very much for inviting me. And if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your valuable insights. Here is a question in Q&A box. It is, since cities are nowadays becoming more vulnerable to disasters and other threats, what kind of aspects should we, urban designers, can focus on to avert such? Your advice to urban designers and planners while designing a city.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we need to see what is the natural conditions of the city, how much heat it's going to get, and heat resistant material so that so much not air conditioning is needed. If it is a cold place, then it's so that's why in my Higgs diagram we had temperature and precipitation and wind patterns and so on. Now wind patterns also, many times cities are designed so that the wind is blocked. And some get so much wind that they cannot open the windows. It's so much wind coming there, and because they are blocking it, and then others don't. Those others suffer in a different way. So everybody suffers. So one has to look at the natural parameters first of the city. I mean, if you're talking about new cities, and design is according to the sun, the wind, the maximum temperature, minimum temperature, its location, and whether it is coastal, whether it's hill, and also the local resources available. Are you close to the forest or close to the Rajasthan? You have available of sand. Maybe you can use the materials of that type. So normally local materials have certain abundance about it, and the resilience to the weather about it. So that these are the things they should keep in mind. Other than that, there is also issue of the town planning rules. They have to be perhaps revised if you are going to have so much. If you're going to have so many types of floods or floods, then we need to have ensure that there is always there's a sidewalk where the water collects, and there is a drainage underneath. So drainage and is a very key issue if it's going to be flooded. If it's not going to be flooded, then you have to see what. So you have to look at the disaster profile as well as weather profile, as well as the location and ecosystem in which it is located, and design the cities accordingly.
Right. Thank you, ma'am. Let me also ask you one question, ma'am. That we had the scheme Swachh Bharat Mission, which really focused in its first phase for total sanitation or the toilets. Now in the second phase, Swachh Bharat Mission Part 2, it is focusing so much on liquid waste management. There was also focus on STPs and Namami Gange and so many other schemes also. Ma'am, how do you see now and ma'am, you talked about smart cities. There are also smart meters and many other components are coming. Ma'am, how do you see that in this pandemic, the command control centers and the other institution and levers we have, how to proceed further, taking into the account the pandemic experiences we just had and how we are ready for such disaster and things coming up, because also India is a land of monsoon And so much.
No, pandemic things were rather unfortunate, and I hope we don't have to keep designing things of this type because it's after a while it gets expensive also to keep preparing for things that happen once in 100 years. That is another issue, and also we were so unprepared and that so much casualty happened. Um, so I'm leaving aside the dead bodies and that sort of issues, but in general, you are mentioning the Namami Gange and this type of issues, which are with us for a very long time. And now they have from the Gangotri to West Bengal, they have located some 300 cities, and what's the each municipality, how much water it is releasing in Ganga. And you can see also the drainage plants of the city, everything is released in whatever river is around there. This used to be the old type of planning 50 years ago. Now we should not resort, I mean, I would say 100 years ago, not resort to these kind of practices, and not a single, there are now people who say not a single drop will go into the river. It has to be recycled within the city boundaries itself. And I think that we will have to do, and people are doing it. You might be knowing London. I was surprised actually, even as far back as 1980, the British planner came to IASA, where I was in Vienna for 8 years. We were there. He says in London, when you drink water, it has been in the insides of 6 people already. So, but then it's so pure that you can drink it like a glass of water. So I think we need to improve wastewater recycling technology on a large scale. It would have to be very large scale. But once you stop putting so much in it, the rivers will automatically, they have a lot of restorative abilities. The nature bounces back. As I was saying, that we found that, you know, people also saw fish in Ganges in few days, and I'm talking about 2020 in March, April. After that, things became much worse. But soon after the lockdown, water also got cleaned up in Yamuna and Ganga. You might have seen photographs. And birds were flocking into Mahim Creek and in Mumbai, so on. So that nature does have a restorative abilities. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am, and thank you for considering our request and go first. We really wanted that all our participants can gain from your fresh morning energy, so not very lunchtime becomes very hectic. So
yeah, I'm sorry. I thought I'm speaking at 12, so I was actually I was sitting here doing other things. Okay,
no
thank you so much. I wish the participants all the best, and do write us sometimes what you are doing with this knowledge. And it's a way I could see 270 participants. So you trained them, that many people. That's creditable for IMPRI and NIDM.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And we will share all the question and other things also with you. And thank you for your kind consideration and
okay,
interacting with everyone. So quickly moving to our next speaker, Nishima, why don't you go ahead and introduce Prasad Modak, sir.
Now I would like to introduce you to our second speaker for the session, Professor Prasad Modak, Executive President, Environmental Management Center, EMC. Professor Prasad Modak is Executive President, Environmental Management Center and Director, eConnect Knowledge Foundation, ex-professor at Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. He has worked with almost all key UN, multilateral and bilateral developmental institutions in the world. Prominent among these include UNEP Geneva, Paris and Osaka, UNDP and UNDESA, New York, URIDO, Vienna, DFID London, GIZ, and CDG Germany, APO Tokyo, SIDA, Embassy of the Netherlands, New Delhi, FAO, the World Bank, IFC, New Development Bank, European Investment Bank, and the Asian Development Bank. Apart from Government of India and various state governments, his advice is sought by governments of Bangladesh, Egypt, Indonesia, Mauritius, Thailand, and Vietnam. He was recipient of the Distinguished Alumni Award of AITAA in 2010 for significant contribution to international affairs. His specialities include environmental policy, environmental assessment, ESG at financing institutions, business and sustainability, circular economy, capacity building in environmental management, modeling, and data analysis. I invite you, sir. Welcome, sir, to IMPRI #Web Policy Learning, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Nishi. And I must once again thank you, Dr. Kumar, for inviting me. This is very impressive. When I looked at the number of participants, more than 250 is amazing. And I would say that that just shows there's a huge traction on this subject, that people want to know more and more.
Sir, yesterday more than 350 people were there. I think getting that.
No.
Sir, do you have slides? You like to share the screen?
I'll just share my slides very briefly and give time for Q&A as you suggested. So let me share my screen and let me know whether it is okay.
Yes, it's on, sir. So you can go full screen. It's working well. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to speak about the disaster waste management. I'm going to give you a kind of a global status where we stand today, and then make some remarks at the end. What could we do in our context in India? If you look at the severity of the problem of disaster waste, we often don't think about it, but it is, if you look at in terms of statistics, it creates sometimes more than 5 to 15 times of the annual waste generation in a very short time in the affected community. So you can imagine the kind of burden it produces on the waste management infrastructure, which is in fact, if you look at it post-disaster, giving a very major challenge. The costs are also significant. In recent years, in many of the mitigation measures post-disaster, the financial costs have crossed $1 billion. There are many examples in terms of the financial costs. At the same time, if planned better, and if we were to acting in a very coordinated manner with a guiding policy, we do see a potential that you can make use of the disaster waste by recycling, and also at the same time ensuring that there is a safe disposal. This is the statistics which I have pulled out, which is not very recent, because I couldn't really find one single snapshot of recent years. It's been a bit fragmented in terms of collecting data. But this is just to give you an illustration. The amount of debris which is getting generated due to disasters and the kind of costs people have incurred in managing this debris. So way back, if you look at the statistics from the tornadoes in central Florida to what you see in this table, some of the tsunamis in the Indian Ocean affecting countries like Sri Lanka, we are talking about really huge quantities and very high budgets that we have to make available to manage this debris. We worry about the disaster waste, of course, because there are public health risks if the waste remain unattended. It also, in many occasions, have hindered the relief and reconstruction related efforts. And above all, there are very significant environmental impacts that we have to worry. So while we face the impacts of the disaster itself, the post-disaster situation is also very alarming when it comes to management of the debris. Again, this is a snapshot, not very recent or updated till about 2015 or so, but you would see that the overall on a global scale, practically all of the world, we are facing the disasters and subsequent debris management post the disasters. And I'm sure maybe other speakers have already spoken about that if you look at the impact of the climate change, we do see that there is a skew as well as change in the intensity, in the occurrences of many of these disasters, be it driven through typhoons or earthquakes. And you do see, therefore, more and more attention needs to be given that we have to be prepared, not just for the disaster, but also the management of the disaster waste. In terms of quantities, this is another table which gives you, if you just look at everywhere, we're talking about quantities in millions of tons and cubic meters. And that's huge. As I said in the beginning, that it can sometimes becomes 5 to 15 times of the annual waste generation and could be even more. So it's really a problem on scale. Now, there are two types we could classify the disaster waste into. One is the waste which is primary, which is generated as a consequence of the disaster. And you can't forget that there is also a secondary waste which is generated in the relief efforts. Although it may not be comparable to the primary, it is important that we have to pay attention to that there is also a secondary waste generated that needs to be tackled. So when we talk about the stages, aligning to typical stages that we follow in disaster management, here again, you have emergency response, a recovery stage, and a rebuild stage. The last part is interesting and very important, that how do we make use of the debris for reconstruction. And in the emergency response, we have to be really prepared that how do we remove the debris as quickly as possible and move more towards restoration and recovery related operations. The debris which gets generated if you look at the management steps, is first to get a sense of what is the extent in terms of magnitude and what kind of composition do we see of the disaster waste. It's very much location specific and related to the type of disaster which is hitting that location. We need to have plans in place, and we'll talk about that a little later, for removal, and that is collection as well as disposal of the waste. And this is where we introduce now the elements of recovery of the debris for the purposes of reconstruction. And in order that we are able to deliver this step of collection or evacuation and recovery and disposal, you need to see whether adequate resources are available at the district or at the state. And then remember that evacuation or collection of the waste and disposal requires some training of people engaged post-disaster operations. And we need to have, therefore, that kind of a capacity already built in so that the disaster can be handled, so that we are ready to execute the plan should the emergency arise. Now, there have been, I've just given you some examples of frameworks which were set up, like the very famous Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, which looked at 2015 to 2030 period. But then if you go through that framework carefully, you will not see that there has been any attention given explicitly so for the management of waste generated from the disasters. However, you do see disaster waste management guidelines available, which have been done collaboratively between different agencies, as you see in this slide, and applied as well. And some of them country specific, like the example of the government of South Australia, which came up with its disaster waste management guidelines. So such guidelines have also been developed in response to some of the past experiences these countries have faced in managing the disaster debris. I would say one of the very recent ones, and if you haven't taken a look, then I would recommend you, is to look at the disaster waste management policy and strategy by the government of Nepal, which was supported by various institutions. You see that in the cover page with the lead taken by the United Nations Environment Programs, IETC, which is International Environment Technology Center. And this document, I think, is something very relevant given that Nepal ranks very high in terms of risks due to climate change, earthquakes, and flood risks. So it's a document worth looking into. And in that document, you see also that they have laid out a disaster waste management related hierarchy and the role to be played by different agencies. All of them are engaged, of course, in the disaster relief, but they also have been given tasks how to play or take activities when it comes to the management of the construction debris. Let me give you some examples. One is very well known, Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant disaster, which was in 2011, and that was a humongous task and very complex because the nature of the debris which had to be managed. And what you saw at that case study experience, what came out, that they came up with guidance notes to the municipalities on how to deal with the disaster debris. And you see this in this slide, a debris category and a very specific suggested approach. These kinds of guidelines, which came really out of the experience, is a resource worth looking at. And although this is a very, very special case, many of these suggested approaches are valid for the kind of debris category that we would expect also in our country. The other one is an example of response on disaster debris which came way back in Italy in 1997, where you see more than 70,000 buildings were damaged that required nearly 1,600 buildings to be demolished. And you see here a huge quantity, nearly close to more than a million or close to a million cubic meters of waste volume. And what you see here, at least 20 to 25% of the debris was recovered as useful debris. You see, this is something very important for all of us to know, that here the relief operations, which had the evacuation and recovery operations on the debris, helped in reconstruction. And this is something very important to note. And the policy level, what the Italian case study talks about, is that they came up with a directive on removal of debris, demolition of buildings, and material recovery. And this is, I would say, again, a document worth looking at. And later on, when there was another disaster because of earthquake, which hit Italy in 2009, they found that these guidelines became very, very useful. This is a case of the Australian bushfires. I will be giving the copy of my presentation to IMPRI, and this has an embedded video, which is wonderful. I'm not screening it just now, but this is the initiative taken by Green Industries South Australia, that how do you manage the waste which is generated in fighting with the bushfires. It's very, very special case, but interesting. The Philippines is a country which, as you know, has been hit very frequently by disasters, especially typhoons. And this is a disaster of 2013, which had a category 5 typhoon Haiyan. The impact was huge. Over 1 million houses were destroyed. The debris estimated, you can see the numbers. This was something very, very difficult to manage. But then they had to get into very, I would call incentivized system where they allowed, because a lot of labor had to be used to take away whatever they thought was valuable. And by that method of incentivizing and permitting them, they could recover a lot of debris, which included lumber and materials such as furniture and materials which can be used to reconstruct the shelters. That is interesting experience in the Philippines. Now, in terms of strategies, therefore, if you looked at it, much emphasis is now going where we emphasize as much we could the recycling. And you see that the strategies, that many of these debris management strategies in countries like Turkey, Japan, Lebanon, you will see recycling plants, mobile recycling plants, in fact, at decentralized depots as a strategy while managing the debris from the disasters. Sri Lanka is one case where such a kind of an approach was used of putting recycling plants immediately post the disaster, handling tsunamis and floods and the landslides. And Sri Lankan case is interesting because that demonstrates that how the 3R approach could be used to manage the construction debris. Of course, this requires preparedness in terms of bringing in the debris recycling infrastructure, particularly the mobile ones. Now, you could even think about in the emergency outsourcing disaster waste management. This has been done. You find there's a private sector preparedness that who, under certain terms and concessions, get engaged to help the local government to manage the disaster waste. This is a trend which I thought I should let you know, to note that you also see there are opportunities looked at in disaster waste management by the private sector. To end, if you look at our framework today, of course, the National Disaster Management Plan of 2016 does talk about the thematic area of disaster recovery. In that, debris management is mentioned. However, during almost the same time when we had the construction and demolition waste management and handling rules, they do not mention about waste generated from disasters. It will be interesting if we are able to establish a link between the two and come up with the guidelines like what you saw in the case of Italy, or the frameworks, integrated frameworks, the way have been done in Nepal, to make disaster waste management in India in a very robust basis. And as I said earlier, bringing in as much possible the concepts of recycling and recovery. But tomorrow I'm going to stop at this point. I think I'm just in time and would be happy to take any questions from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable insights. Here is a question in Q&A box. How important is a watershed management to mitigate urban flooding, which causes disaster in many cities?
Well, it's not a question in line to what I spoke, but still I would say certainly, developing the watersheds in and around the urban centers has been always found to be beneficial in terms of reducing the what we call as the land surface temperature variations and the microclimate related issues, which do help in many ways to to reduce the climate stress. So I would say definitely yes, urban watersheds, watersheds around the urban areas will be very important to be looked into.
Yes, sir. Sir, I would like to ask a question. How important is to have an integrated common hazardous waste management facilities like biomedical waste treatment facility and etc.?
Well, again, this is not something to what I spoke, but still I will answer this question. Certainly, common waste treatment facilities, we call them as a common environmental infrastructure, is a need, and we have been doing so. It all began with the common effluent treatment plants 30 years ago, and today we have nearly 200 common effluent treatment plants running in the country. Then came common hazardous waste treatment and disposal facilities, as we had the hazardous waste management rules. And today we have, even a state like Gujarat, more than 15 such common hazardous waste treatment disposal facilities. On the common biomedical waste treatment facilities, we have a number of them. And in fact, that is a facility today which is heavily loaded post-COVID scenario, when the biomedical waste quantum has increased, and so particularly the plastic content. Now, all these common facilities are typically operated in a public-private partnership model, where there's a concession given in terms of land lease by the government. And then there is sometimes a grant component by the state and the center. And then there is a contribution done by the beneficiaries, like in the case of common effluent treatment plants and common hazardous waste disposal facilities. And the company, which is what we call the special purpose vehicle, makes a pricing or charging policy to recover their capital and operating costs. Nishi, there is a big challenge how
Yes, sir.
well these facilities function. And that's always a case where you find that many of them, although built and operating, they may not meet the required norms. It's a complex issue. There have been many legal cases because of their poor performance.
So how can GIS assisted spatial analysis can help in vulnerability assessment in the cities?
Well, I would say it's extremely useful tool, but not just cities, but in the regions. What we do is, many of you know that for the vulnerability studies, we look at exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. When it comes to exposure, we look at variables like temperature and precipitation and the winds, especially the gust winds, and so on. That data, which is modeled for different RCEP scenarios, which is available, if transformed into GIS layers and then arrive at the vulnerability indices at a resolution which we can do comfortably in India at 50 by 50 kilometers, because there's a GIZ web portal where such a kind of a data is available for 2030, 2050 and 70. And GIS then becomes a very useful preprocessor for you to come up with zoning of the vulnerabilities and then accordingly the policy and planning decisions.
So since most of the budget is allocated to collection and transportation on solid waste and less is given to recovery and processing of it, so your thoughts on it?
Well, you cannot deny that the collection has to have a higher budget. It's about normally 60 to 70% of a typical urban waste management. The remaining is for treatment and processing, which is about, say, 30%. And that split is inevitable because of we are talking mostly centralized collections. If we, on the other hand, do a decentralized approach to reduce the transportation distances, that component reduces, but we lose economy of scale in processing, and there is therefore a incremental increase in the cost of waste processing. However, decentralized plants have the advantage of a community involvement as well as recovery and recycling possibilities, especially compost and generation of biogas. So there is a localized benefit in the decentralized plants. But yet, the collection or transportation if a centralized approach is used, will continue to play a dominant role in the cost structure. Well, Dr. Kumar, I was expecting more questions on disaster risk, but certainly it gives me a feeling that this is a subject not yet looked into by many of us, and therefore, it doesn't catch the attention. However, as I was saying, for institutes like you, and of course the NIDM, you can play a very critical role in formulating guidelines and make them implementable for managing disaster risk.
Right, right. And sir, taking cue from what you just mentioned, India, as we know, is not a country, but rather a subcontinent. We have Northeast, coastal area, mountains, and sir, you mentioned many models and also highlighted Italy and others. And since we are a subcontinent, there are so different parts of it. If something is happening in, let us say, Northeast or Jammu and Kashmir, the situation is so different from Odisha or what is happening in our coastline. So, would you also tell our all the participants that what to look for the coastal areas, which countries or which framework for mountainous area for our plateau, especially pertaining to disaster and waste management, if you can. So that we can connect.
Dr. Kumar, irrespective of the location, some fundamental strategies will remain as common. The context, when it is broad, like you said, coastal or mountainous area, the approach for the disaster waste evacuation or collection and its safe disposal changes. So, for example, you wouldn't like that the construction debris is let go in the coastal systems, causing a significant environmental impact. Or you do not want in the mountainous region debris to be disposed such that it alters the water course and creates a secondary impact in the next rainfall to create floods. So these precautionary measures, you're right, will have to be site specific. However, the general strategic approach or strategies and the principles will remain the same.
Right, right, sir. We also have various areas, especially the river plains, where it has become business as usual, the scenario, and also we are not fully irrigated, 30-40% only of our farms are like that. So climate resilient agriculture is also becoming one of the main issue. In Delhi, because of the stubble burning and other factors, the air is really not breathable. How would you also suggest that we also eliminate such future disaster like air pollution and other very chronic things happening across our cities and regions?
Yeah. So I will first differentiate the term when you said air pollution, because one is there is a chronic issue of air pollution because the air quality is poor in the cities and people are getting affected by health. The second is the emergent release of air emissions, which is disaster prone situation, which happens when there is a industrial accident or a leak or an explosion. So these two subjects are different. In our case, what we probably talk more about the chronic issue, where we all suffer because of the air pollution in the cities. And as you know, the government is trying to set up committees or task forces. They have made what we call as a as a graded plan for Delhi, as an example, to come up with actions and roles and responsibilities. When it comes to disaster-like situation, like Bhopal tragedy is one example, then it is falling under the purview of what do we do under the Factories Act and respond to the disaster and come with a disaster preparedness. So there, the leakages or explosions because of chemicals stored in the industrial facilities, they will play a role. Safety will play a big role. The on-site disaster management plans, which are mandated by the Factories Act, will play a role. Off-site management plans, which need to be developed at the city or district level, they will play a role. You know, having been in many such committees in the country, I find that nothing much happens when the real situation happens. And we really are in many ways very good when it comes to documenting the plan. We are not bad there at all. But when it comes to actually getting on board to work on such disasters on air emissions, then we run into a problem. To give you an example, in the state of Maharashtra, we have a Raigad district, which is chemicalized, we say, because it's got lots of industries and they make use of hazardous chemicals. Now, during transportation, if there is an accident and a tanker topples, then it is very difficult for the local police to understand what to do in that emergent situation. It can be an explosion, it can be a leak into the air with toxic substances. So I remember some 25 years ago, Dr. Kumar, I did training of 800 policemen in Raigad district. How do you respond to such emergencies? They didn't know how to read the sign on the tanker. Remember that HIGS sign. What it means. People didn't know. So I'm referring, Dr. Kumar, to that practical level of training required, which I know institutions like you would do. But the scale is large that we need to make people understand how to take account of such situations. I'm referring here to accidents and air emissions, which are abnormal releases. These are the situations that are different from the chronic issue I told you about, the perpetual air pollution which we face in cities.
Right. Some questions have also come, and that's really pertains to what are the levers which district administration or the local administration can use. For example, Swati ma'am from UN Habitat yesterday was making a case that waste should be linked with property tax, or there should be some mechanism so that there is some incentive, some penalty. What do you think that would work for India? Also, sir, I wanted to mention that we have Factories Act and others, National Clean Air Program also. But the implementation side, why do you think that people hesitate? One is the cost factor, of course, but what are the other bottlenecks to focus upon, and what practitioners should focus?
Okay, Dr. Kumar, there are a number of questions you raised, so I'll go one by one. I'll take the last one. My own experience is that only when you communicate to people the cost of inaction or the cost of the damage in economic terms, only then they understand why they have to be prepared for the disaster. And that communication is not often done so that people understand the gravity, that if they don't prepare themselves for implementation, they're going to lose a lot. Not just in terms of losing the assets, but what we call as a business outage. And that is something in addition to affecting their brand reputation. No investor will go again if the disaster, for example, in the industry was not well managed. So this is one part of making people aware. If they don't act, what can be the situation in economic terms. The second part is how do we incentivize people towards waste management? This is the first question what you ask. Now, one is of course that you use economic instrument and load in your property tax a certain fee. The challenge is that how to find who are the good citizens and who are the bad ones who are not segregating or handling the waste generated in the household. You may have a property with 100 people living there, 50 very responsible, 50 not responsible. Property tax won't be the instrument which will distinguish between the good ones and not so good ones. People have tried different approaches, like in Pune Municipal Corporation. They said they will simply not lift the waste if it is not segregated. When that became a problem, that the waste started piling at the households as well as in the housing societies, people complied and they started segregating the waste. So there are different ways that one could use, but the only thing finally is each citizen's understanding on responsibility. I never forget that I was in the Tokyo airport once, and a small toddler came with a used bottle for drinking. Small toddler. And as you know, in Japan, there's 7 different bins. And I was very curious to see which bin he will go. First of all, going to the bin itself was a great act. And the second, which of the 7? And the child put it in the right bin. Japan came up with Sound Material Society Act in 2000. It took them 20 years to ingrain sustainability as a part of living. I don't know how many years will it take, although you very well, all of us know that our culture is basically on the foundations of sustainability. Perhaps urbanization and I would say our overconsumption patterns have taken us away from what our ancestors used to do. And the sheer size of population makes it very hard to put those principles in practice today. However, take a case like a country like Japan, where sustainability is not have to be spoken so much, because every day in the schools, half an hour is spent by children to clean the school. That's the challenge, Dr. Kumar. Why we see a difference between what all we preach and we tell others what to do, and what we live is different to what we talk.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Sir, have you also taught some of the students, school-going students, regarding this waste management or disaster-related
Oh
things?
yes, oh yes, Dr. Kumar, this is what I thought. I should just do that instead of giving talks and just be with children.
Yes. And sir, how has been the experience and your feelings
Amazing. My
regarding?
experience, Dr. Kumar, is they teach you and not you teach them.
Yes, I think that's very important, sir. And
The child teaches.
great, great. Thank you so much, sir. And
Pleasure.
I think we can, for such very wonderful presentation, thank you so much. And
Thank you for
we
this
would
opportunity.
look very much forward to learning more from you, sir. And let us now quickly go to our next expert.
Thank you.
Yes,
Bye
sir.
bye.
We will share all the question and other things over email, so that if there is anything pressing, we can have that. And we will also request you to give your PPT so that we can upload on our event page if
Yes,
you like.
I will do that. Thank you once again. Bye bye.
Thank you, sir. Have a nice day. Thank you. Yes. So our next speaker is Rachna ma'am. Rachna ma'am, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Ma'am, you can have also your video. Yeah, great. Great. So quickly moving ahead, Nishi ma'am, why don't you introduce Dr. Rachna?
So I would like to introduce you to the last speaker, Dr. Rachna Arora, Team Leader, Circular Economy Solutions Preventing Marine Litter, GIZ, India. Dr. Rachna Arora is working as a team leader in the Resource Efficiency Project funded by the European Union on issues related to fostering resource efficiency and secondary resource utilization. She is also working as a team leader on the GIZ Circular Economy Solutions project to prevent marine litter, financed by the German Ministry of Environment, Nature Conservation. She has been working with GIZ since last 13 years under the bilateral projects, Combi Finance projects of the European Commission, and the partnership projects with the private sector with relevant ministries and government departments. She has been supporting the Government of India on policy formulations and its implementation. She is a TEDx speaker on circular economy. She was a member of the Interdepartment Committee set up by Niti Aayog on Resource Efficiency Strategy and Research and Development Committee set up by the Ministry of Information Technology and Communication, Government of India on Electronic Waste Management. She is also working as a working group member of the FICCI Circular Economy Group constituted in 2017 to support industry research and dialogues on circular economy. I invite you, ma'am. Welcome, ma'am, to IMPRI #Web Policy Learning, and over to you.
Thanks a lot for the introduction, and also thanks for inviting us here. I think it looks like a very, very impressive program, and I'm also quite impressed to see the audience, like almost having 300, 350 people. Yeah, so I think congratulations for that. I would just like to share my screen. Just give me a minute. Let me know once you're just able to see it.
Ma'am, we can see it. You can go full screen. It's coming well.
Okay. Okay, just a second. Actually, we are not used to using Zoom too much. I just need to make it full screen. Okay. Now I think it works, right?
It's working. Yeah, please go ahead, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, good. So yeah, I think I spoke to Dr. Arjun earlier, and I think looking through the entire day, and I think today is the third day of this training, I just thought of reflecting on circular economy. I'm sure some of the speakers might have already addressed it, but something very new and something that we are developing, we started it in 2019 to actually look at circularity within the e-waste sector per se, no? Waste from electronics and electrical equipments, WEEE, as it's called, and also seeing that linkage to circular economy. So that's why I just thought, let me just present this perspective, which is pretty new, because I think reading through the regulations is something that you can always just access and do it. But I would just like to bring out a perspective which is pretty, I would say, in the discussion. It started now in March in 2019, this year, on actually designing circular economy action plans with some of the key ministries. So that's what I would just like to highlight some bit of it. So I think on circular economy, you would have already thought of or been discussed. So basically, if you just see any economy, any product that you actually use, any material, could be textile, could be electronics, it was actually designed with an entire approach of where you are extracting resources, which are the primary resources like copper, gold, aluminum, any kind of a metallic resource, or biotic resources. And then of course you have a production stage, a consumption stage, which is where we as consumers use the product, and then there's an end of life stage. So a lot of work that has happened across has always been focusing on waste reduction, waste management, waste recycling, and improving on there. But a lot of principles that come across with the circular economy, where we actually think about waste to resources as an approach. So in circular economy, actually, there's nothing which is kind of considered waste, because there are these loops that you consider in an economy, which is where the waste becomes a secondary resource. And why just waste? If you look at the entire life cycle of the product, you actually are looking at utilizing the materials across the life cycle. So this is what the circular economy imbibes. And I think this started in 2015 in the EU. Ellen MacArthur is one of the leading foundations that's being putting forward these kind of approaches, getting a lot of private sector mobilization on circular economy transition. And even in India, there's a lot of progress. So that's what I would just like to highlight on today's presentation as well. So when it comes to circular economy, this is, of course, a paradigm shift, and where you actually consider the entire life cycle across from the consumption and the production system, right? So it's a completely transformative process, but it also requires a lot of actors to come into. So if we are to compare linear and circular, in linear, what do we talk about is raw materials and waste. In circular, what we focus on is just raw materials. So a secondary material like a waste is also called a secondary raw material, because that's an input for some further process that can actually do it. In linear economy, we largely focus on competition. Like, what is one recycler doing? What is one company doing? What is my USP? How do I make it better? But in circular economy, we talk about a collaborative ecosystem, and there are examples of how it's working. There are examples of how it is not working. So if you have a competing system, of course, circularity is very, very difficult to imbibe. But if you really follow a collaborative ecosystem, that's where it's possible. And I think Dr. Prasad Modak was actually hinting around a lot of approaches that's happening globally, plus in India. You talk about collaborative ecosystems across. Then individuals is important when it comes to linear, but in circular, as I mentioned, the entire ecosystem approach is required. Linear, of course, looks at do less bad, whereas in circular, we actually think about doing more good, positive, sustainability approaches as well. Then in linear, we usually talk about what is the added value of a particular product? What is the added value with my recycling rates? What is the added value if I actually increase the recyclability of this product, and of course, enhance its usability. But in circular, we actually talk about shared values, ecosystem, and largely the entire approaches where it's actually talking about upcycling approaches. Now, there's a lot that is globally available, and taking just a very little like a example around what is downcycling, what is upcycling. So in India, if you pick up any literature on plastic waste, you would actually just read that 60 to 70% of our plastic waste actually is highest in across the globe, that it actually gets recycled. I think close to 60 to 65% waste actually gets recycled by the informal sector. Now, when we talk about recycling, there's an efficiency parameter, there is a product that you can actually make, and there's a value added product that you can make. Now, if this is a high value plastic, say a plastic from an electronic equipment, for instance, would have a high value added plastic. It is not the plastic that you use in your home, like a single use plastic. This is a value added material. Plastic from your automobiles is a value added metal or a plastic. So it has a higher value, and you actually need to upcycle to make products of equivalent or similar parameters as it is allowed in the standards. But I think that's what we talk about as an entire upcycling shift when it comes to circular economy. So there are a lot of examples, and I think if you pick up Ellen MacArthur literature, you will also just see this butterfly diagram that's famous all across the world. But there are these approaches of how do you actually strategize, how do you work on circular economy. So taking few examples and relating it to electronic waste, for instance, largely, or electronic products largely. So there's an approach called as narrowing loops. Now, narrowing loops is, on one side, you look at the lifetime, where if you compare a linear flow, where, as I said, production to the end of life stage, right? But when we talk about a resource use on the other axis, in terms of narrowing loop, you will actually create products which have same levels of performance. So you can produce and use it, and it has almost similar levels of performance when you're using less input material. So how can we do that? In fact, by increasing the lifespan of a product. So the product that you're using, say a washing machine at home, might have a life of 7 to 10 years, but can we extend it beyond? And if we can extend it beyond, we can extend the durability of that product. Then, of course, that's what is the entire approach of narrowing loops, so that your end of life kind of discard of these products is reduced. And here you are doing changes upstream. You're not looking at a product once it is end of life. So if you have to design a washing machine that has more life than 7 to 10 years, you have to consider narrowing loops example at the design stage itself and not the end of life stage. Another example is slowing loops. Now, slowing loops is where, of course, here also comparing it at the production and the usage stage. So here we would look at extending use and reuse of products over the entire lifetime period. So basically looking at how much is the time the materials will spend in use before it's finally getting into the recycling or disposal stage. As I took example of plastic, there's several innovators working across who are actually looking at reusing the life of the component, reusing the life of the product that we have, and extending it over a period, time period, so that the end of life is actually minimized. And the last example is, of course, closing loops. Now, closing loops can again be designed in the technical cycle and the biological cycle. Now, there is a lot of discussion where we talk about the entire availability of biomaterials, designing products which is like nature, because nature actually doesn't create any waste, right? So if we design products which can actually have similar kind of biodegradability, or increasing the proportion of the material, so increasing the recycled content of these products. So that's where we can actually think about an entire approach which is closing the loops. And again, here the products are designed in the way that it is easy to dismantle, easy to remanufacture or recycle. This, I'm not sure, maybe you already heard it from some speakers, just trying to also just mention that resource efficiency, circular economy is across the globe. It's not just in the EU, it's not just in China or Japan. It's all across the globe. And I think a lot of it started with the Green Industrial Revolution. It started in China way back with the Circular Economy Act. In Philippines with the Public Procurement Roadmap. In India, we also have a draft National Resource Efficiency Policy. This is where we as a project, which is the European Union Resource Efficiency Initiative, we contributed to developing this resource efficiency draft with the Ministry of Environment and Forest. We also have a resource efficiency strategy, which was done with NITI Aayog in 2017. So why resource efficiency and circular economy actually became important, and what's the link to different sectors? So today we, of course, like at least I'm focusing on e-waste, but if you just look at entire kind of domestic production, 97% of our resources are actually produced domestically. But when it comes to the critical raw materials, so if you pick up your mobile phone, it has scandium, it has cobalt, it has tungsten, a lot of these critical materials which are required for the printed circuit board to function effectively would be import dependent. And we are also, of course, not making, we have facilities in India to actually have the PCB boards being produced, but still we are rather dependent on import of critical raw materials. And of course, a lot of it is dominated by China. So if we look across, even 95% of copper, 74% lead, which is major material when it comes to the transition. Say everyone talks about moving to solar, moving to renewables, moving to electric vehicles, for example, but you would require raw materials. And the sourcing of these raw materials is very important. And this is where the entire opportunity for resource efficiency, circular economy across the globe has been reflected, that it's important to think about the entire traceability of these materials, but also have the production efficiencies or recycling efficiency of these materials so that we can extract as much as possible from the secondary materials or the waste per se, if you want to call, rather than mining the virgin resources. So for critical raw materials, as I already mentioned, in India, we don't have any reserves. For the others also, like steel, aluminum, if we can actually recover it from an end-of-life automobile, it's much more resource efficient rather than extracting it again through that entire process of extracting virgin materials or from bauxite mining or so. So that's what is the opportunity. Coming to electronic waste, this is the definition. You can actually access it from the regulations that we have on the Ministry of Environment and Forest website. So e-waste per se is actually defined as per the rules as any broken, unwanted electronic or electrical appliance. It includes computers, consumer electronics, phones, medical equipment, toys, any other items which is discarded by the original users. E-waste also includes the manufacturing defects, manufacturing rejects or assembly defects during the assembling. So all of that, which is the industrial reject, is also part of the e-waste definition. So if you have to consider what are the objectives of the e-waste rules as it was formulated by the Ministry of Environment and Forest, so it's largely looks at minimizing illegal recycling and recovery operations. Now, way back when we started this entire discussion in 2007 and 8, the e-waste rules were, the electronic waste was handled by the informal sector. Even if we see currently, the operations still are quite a lot in the informal economy. We have still not been able to move it to the recyclers, which we have in country close to 200, 300 dismantlers and recyclers. We have PROs that have been formed, producer responsible organization, but still a lot of it is channelized to the informal sector, considering that the larger chunk of the materials, which is largely from households, does get generated and does get channelized to the informal operators. The other objective of the regulation was to actually talk about what is the process for environmentally sound recycling and how do you actually channelize this waste to a registered or authorized e-waste recycler. The other interesting bit that e-waste rules actually brought forward was the principle of EPR, extended producer responsibility, where producers, importers, brand owners of any product that you're buying, electronic product or electrical appliances, is supposed to take back the product at the end of its life, is supposed to finance the e-waste collection, is supposed to channelize this collected e-waste to a registered recycler or a dismantler. So that's what is the entire bit, and that's where the origin of PROs, producer responsible organizations, has happened over the last 3 or 4 years, once we saw the rules coming up with target-based monitoring mechanisms. Then we have urban local bodies who are just responsible to figure out the orphan products. Like waste, say 10 years back, there was a company selling a television, but now it's out of market. So that's the product which is called orphan waste. And if it's found mixed in municipal solid waste, then it's the urban local bodies' responsibility to actually give it to a formal e-waste collection agency. Then, of course, I think the other bit together with EPR was actually reducing hazardous substances in electronic and electrical components, which is called ROHs. And this is something that is, I would say, quite similar to the EU ROHs, which is existing. So most of the companies selling products in India would actually comply with this legislation, where you actually have an entire set of parameter of how much would be the toxic content in a product or in a component when it is being sold or assembled in India. This is the schedule. You can look through. There are items covered in the e-waste rules. There's a lot of discussion on increasing, decreasing, adding more, because a lot of things were missed out. But when these rules got finalized, of course, the idea was to start with the major chunk of e-waste items to be covered in these rules as it is in the Schedule 1 for now. The key stakeholders were, as I started to mention, with the EPR legislation, extended producer responsibility. Producers and manufacturers are the key kind of stakeholders to implement the rules. So we also look at importers, manufacturers of the assembling and the product, or even selling via retail units in India. Consumers and bulk consumers are responsible. Consumers, like we as individually, are responsible to actually give it out to the formal recycling chain. So this is all covered under the regulations, but the bulk consumers, which is where institutions, private and public offices, for instance, could actually take a decision when they're buying the product and also when they're discarding these products to actually consider the multiple quantities of IT and consumer application products. The PROs and e-waste collectors, as I mentioned, PRO, producer responsible organization, is responsible to collect, store, and meet the targets that these companies like producers and manufacturers have under the EPR legislation. Now, considering this, there's been a lot of PROs who have also been registered, and you can also just look through. We've worked closely with some of them, and I think it's a lot happening in the PRO space as well in India. We also have some digital PROs who have also started to come up, and they also have very interesting models of how they could actually support better traceability when it comes to the entire collection and meeting this obligation for the brands. Dismantlers and recyclers, as the name suggests, is actually looking at segregating the material, looking through the refurbishment, repair, and recycling bit. And then, of course, recyclers are using appropriate technologies to recover materials as much as possible. Given the current recyclers in India, you can check through the list which is available on the CPCB and the SPCB's website. A lot of them are actually looking at recycling per se, but I think since currently the volumes is a big issue. I mentioned about informal sector getting still a lot of material. A lot of waste actually just gets exported to outside India, and then we have recyclers who are just looking at, or dismantlers who are carrying forward a lot of this operation through segregation and repair, refurbishment, and of course doing value extraction from plastics, glass, and other materials, or even copper recycling to some matter. But a lot of it actually gets exported. The printed circuit boards get exported because there are only few recyclers who recycle it to the efficiencies that we are talking about. I would now like to just talk about EPR as a policy instrument and how does that promote resource efficiency, circular economy. So if we just look through the design of EPR across the globe, I think it started in 1992. In the Lund University, there's a professor called Professor Lindqvist, and he is called the father of EPR actually. So he was the one who actually just said that if you are to consider putting, like, so earlier this principle was also called as polluter pays, which is visible in a lot of waste legislations. So basically, if you are to reduce the impact of a product, you have to make producers responsible for the entire life cycle. That was the idea, and that's how EPR actually came into practice. So it actually looks at both upstream and downstream processes. So upstream processes, if you have to consider design for environment, restriction of hazardous substances, I gave an example, improved design for dismantling, so that if your material is handled by informal sector or if your waste is handled by anyone, they would know that this battery has X amounts of hazardous constituents. How do you actually recycle and recover lead or copper without making any, without risking the health of people who are handling it or without environmental risks. So this is what is the design, like upstream processes. In terms of downstream, largely the waste management, collection, physical, financial responsibilities, all with the, covered under the EPR, as I just mentioned. So all across the globe, I would say close to 300, 400 policies have been adopted. And this is not just on electronic waste. If you just pick up packaging, we have examples in India already about the plastic waste legislation talking about EPR, batteries, vehicles, end-of-life vehicles, tires, for instance, and others are also kind of just considered globally. And the scale of this adoption of the EPR as a principle has been increasing over the last, I would say, 20 years. Yeah. In terms of, I think, increasing awareness, we really appreciate the session like these, which actually bring together different people to enhance exchange. So everyone comes with their own perspective, but I think it's important to create that awareness. So maybe some of you already knew about a channel where you can discard any of your Samsung, Apple, Lenovo, whichever models you're using. You might have heard about the collection channel, so you can check through their websites. So there's a lot that is actually to be done at an individual level, at a bulk generation level on awareness. But given the diversity that we have in India, it's actually not easy to design EPR awareness sessions like this. But METI, for instance, Ministry of IT, last, I would say, 5 years, has been doing under the Digital India platform a lot of work on awareness programs. And you can actually visit their website, Green E, and a lot of information, even some of these slides that I am using would be available on Green E website, which you can use. Then, I can skip this. And just share a few examples because I think I just have 5 more minutes left. So on EPR and this link, I would say repairs is very, very important. And in a country like India, where we actually have processes to enhance repair, and we usually have kind of a tendency towards improving the life of a product, we still have to have a model like this which can promote a formal repair mechanism. In Sweden, for instance, we have a VAT, which actually allows the government, there's a government intervention to actually allow repair services, right? Which also gives job opportunities, but also enhances the life of a product that you're using. So you don't need to discard a product just because it's having a small screen break or whatever. You can actually get it repaired if the product is also modular. A particular kind of, a lot of economic instruments are available, but for example, DRS, Deposit Refund Scheme. This is quite, I think extensively used across on electronics, similar on plastic waste. This is coming up, where actually if you pick up, for instance, an example from Germany, a smartphone produced in Germany with high repairability and recyclability because it's a modular design. So this is something where you actually find spare parts for sale, screen, camera, batteries, etc. And you can actually get it repaired yourself. So that's available. But then when you're buying the product, you're actually paying 22 euros extra, which is reimbursed if you actually repair it in a good amount. So I think this can help the companies also to put this kind of economic instruments, and also the consumers to return it back into the right channel by actually contributing to this. Informal sector, last 2 slides that I have, there are a lot of examples. We've done extensive amounts of work, and some of these organizations are still functional. For example, this is just one of the examples that we are explicitly presenting. Sahas as an agency works in Bangalore, and I also saw in the agenda Harshad from Pune, for instance. We also work very closely with them to actually set up linkages between the informal sector and the formal players. Because even if you have a formal mechanism, it won't land up in that channel, because the kabadi walas that come to your house, kabadi walas that go for tendering process would actually get the material much more than a formal company trying to invest. So that's how we try to work with these companies, put them together to work with Microsoft, for instance, and set up a model where there's a financial flow, material, and sets of agreements, letter of intent signed, so that there is a formal actor from an informal sector who can actually bring them an entire legislative cover, and also have an innovative business model where waste from the households is actually collected and channelized. This bit I can skip. Yes, just last point, I think, on this enhancing life and policy prescriptions is through eco-design. I mentioned about it, and I think a lot of brands are currently investing on longevity of the product. We ourselves, as I mentioned, we are working with Niti Aayog. METI has actually put forward an entire e-waste strategy, which is actually not looking from e-waste point of view. It is actually looking from enhancing circular economy in electronic waste. This document is available on METI's website for public comments, and there is a lot of recommendations, as I presented today, on enhancing longevity, on eco-design, on raw materials, on traceability, EPR, and all of that. And I think the larger discussions we have about repairs, spare parts, modular design, it's going to improve that entire process, rather than thinking about product having 2 years or 3 years, as we have seen. Because the more waste you add, the more complexity is it. So designing products which have a higher lifespan is good for the environment, maybe not too good for the companies who are selling it. But yeah, I think that's what it is across. And globally, plus in India, we're having this discussion on enhancing the technical lifespan of the products. Yeah, so that's it from my side. Any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for your valuable insights. Here is a question: whether circular economy is the part of the sustainability practice, and if so, how we can follow it in our day-to-day life.
Okay, let me just see how do I. Right. Yeah. No, I think sustainability is pretty much part of our practice. As Indians, we already, as I mentioned, we try to do a lot of these, yeah, I think day-to-day approaches, but certain things, like as I took 1 or 2 of these examples, repair is traditionally there, but we are still not doing it as a formal mechanism. The other bits on, say, for instance, there's a lot of campaigns happening around single-use plastic, and even in extending the life of the product. So I think as consumers, we can actually support these kind of transition models quite a lot, enhance the life of the product. Not needed, don't buy a new product. Now, why do we want from one version to the other if the devices are actually functional? So it depends on the consumer of how you want to imbibe these practices in your daily life. But yeah, I would say globally, both in the country as well, there's a lot of sustainability moves that's happening. A lot of companies are considering circular economy standards as a part of their ESG reporting as well. So yeah, so I would say there's already quite developments and progress in that. But still, just one point in for discussion is that it's still driven in the waste management space. It's not coming from the upstream space. And I think this is what we are currently missing. And we're trying to add a lot more value by putting these things which are designed for upstream kind of changes. I hope that answers.
Thank you. Yeah. And it is, how can we use circular economy strategy in plastic uses, minimization to reduce land pollution, So your thoughts on it. And second, how it is important to harmonize the methods of definition and calculation and comparing data from different countries for implementation of circular economy in India.
Right. Okay, so I'll answer the first question because that's directly related on the policy level. So in circular economy, the resource efficiency draft policy, as I mentioned, when it was announced in 2019, actually it said it had already proposed few of the indicators to measure. But as I mentioned, a lot of this is currently still in the waste domain. So you already have indicators and targets for say plastic waste or electronic waste in the e-waste regulation, in the plastic waste regulation, in the biomedical or in end-of-life vehicles and all of that. So that's why developing an overarching monitoring and evaluation indicators is really, really important. Currently, what we are trying to do is, of course, look through the SDG 12. That's one of the major kind of an SDG which contributes to resource efficiency circular economy. And I also saw the recent release of the SDGs in India. It's still just report on SDG 12. What we have seen is the states are reporting on hazardous waste, on the industrial waste, that how that much is channelized. It's still not reporting on interesting options, no? Of how do you actually talk about circularity largely. What is the contribution to GDP if you're actually using secondary materials, if you're not sourcing primary materials? So I think those things are still not figured out. We are a EU project, so we're trying to get a lot of that expertise from UBA, like from the German counterparts, plus the European counterparts. So we'll try and see as much as possible and develop something which is for the Ministry of Environment and Forest. And the second question, yeah, I think was on plastics. So on plastics, the single-use plastics campaign was just released on 8th of June, which is the Oceans Day by the Environment Minister. And as JI said, we are actually supporting this entire awareness creation on circularity in plastics, because I think we all know of that it's actually quite difficult to talk about a short lifespan of a plastic and of course increase the value, but still there are alternatives which are available to these single-use plastic, and that's what it would need a lot of investment, a lot of time, awareness creation to actually talk about a replacement of single-use plastic. But that's what we are trying to address through this campaign, which was launched by the Indian minister last week.
Thank you, ma'am. There is a question of how viable do you think the repairability index of France is, and should India implement a similar regulation to reduce e-waste? Second, can government provide financial help to startups for implementing a full course e-waste recycling unit as the machinery cost is too high for India?
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So on the repairability index, as I mentioned, that even just I think as I mentioned that METI has actually put forward this electronic waste circular economy in EEE sector, electronics and electrical sector. This has been put forward. There's a lot of industry resistance to this document, and I think we are now part of a lot of these task forces which are actually evaluating it. So repairability, like right to repair, is the term which is called, and this is something which was put forward in this document. Of course, it's not easy to talk about it. In France, how they introduce the repairability on paper might look similar, that it's easy to introduce it, but I think brands have their own kind of resistance to introduce, because I think it takes an entire course. So we cannot imbibe something that's happening in France directly, but of course, there needs to be a set of consultative processes to actually adapt the system. And in India, repairability means very, very different to different sets of, I think, consumers that we have. So that's one. And what was the second question? If you might just repeat it again, because I think
Can government provide financial help to startups for implementing a full course e-waste recycling unit as the machinery cost is too high?
Right. So there is, as I mentioned, if you can visit the METI website. In fact, one of the committees where I was, METI has actually kind of created a low-cost technology with CMET, Center for Materials and Electronic Technology in Hyderabad. And this is a prototype. It's kind of a small unit, but they are kind of selling the license. They are kind of supporting people to actually seek this license, apply it, and that's not too expensive. That's possible to be utilized. And I would say it will be good to check on that. One is that. The other bit is in terms of larger financial investments. There's an approach which is coming on is to set up eco parks in India on electronic waste. And in fact, today itself, there's a discussion happening with DPCC in Delhi itself to actually set up an eco park on electronic waste recycling in Delhi. So yeah, I think there's a lot happening, and I'm sure when they talk about eco parks, they are looking at technology access and yeah, different sorts of loans or other things that can be taken up.
Thank you, ma'am. As in European unions, there are very strict laws around secure disposal of e-waste. In India, do we have similar sort of laws, or they are getting still evolved? Second question is, why do mobile or electronic companies make rules that users should give back the used machine and they can start recycling it? So what do you think such rules, why do you think such rules do not exist?
No, the rules in India exist. As I mentioned, in 2009 and 10, the process started. So we have the regulation, which was, yeah, I think notified in 2011. And then, of course, it's been revised and amended in 2016. So these rules are existing in India. It's available on the Ministry of Environment and Forest website. And on CPCB, you'll also find the implementation guidelines to these regulations on setting up recycling or dismantling units as well as on implementation. So the rules are available. The other bit is around the, yeah, I think on circular economy is what is evolving, but not that we have the regulations. On the producers side, I think, as I mentioned, EPR as an instrument has been introduced globally. And this was also originally, and I think Professor Shamla Mani is already there. There's a lot of discussion which is happening around, it was in the past on polluters pays principle. So if you're making a product, you have to be responsible for the entire life cycle, which means that it has to come back into a formal chain. So that's how the brands are complying with it globally. In India also it was introduced in from 2011 or 16, I can count on. And yeah, I think this is not, that's how you actually channelize the waste. Otherwise, anyone can discard the waste in their bin as well, rather than just giving it into a formal channel. So if we need to talk about circularity, recovering resources from these materials, we need a supply chain which has to be set up. As we have the supply chain for selling the goods, we have a supply chain for the reverse logistics. So I think that's how the EPR instrument also works in setting it up.
Okay, ma'am, let me also not ask a question, but request you to focus also upon the circular economy aspect. Ashish sir from GIZ are working on these issues for many years. Many other countries have taken it very seriously. For example, UK, Germany also, European nation, East Asian countries. What do you see how India is taking it, or what would you like to tell all of our participants, those who are getting this training, how to get acquainted with this and also align with sustainable consumption and production, and your experiences?
Thanks. Yeah, so I think as GIZ, we started it in 2012. The discussion started on resource efficiency, and I had one of the slides, but I think I skipped it. So the idea was to actually talk about resource efficiency way back in 2012. And from there on, the Indian government, through a lot of bilateral projects, through their own initiatives, has taken forward resource efficiency, circular economy, transition policies, I would say. It's been challenging, but still currently, considering that we started in 2012 and we are in 2021, where Niti Aayog, for instance, and that's where Ashish and a lot of our colleagues actually are a part of these committees. So circular economy, yeah, I think we largely work with the Ministry of Environment and Forest, but circular economy also needs other ministries to come forward, right? If it's a steel related issue, as I made an example of bauxite mining, it's a mining related issue, it is to be handled by that core ministry. It can have environmental perspectives, but the business model needs to come out in an innovative way, which is to become and also a lot of instruments that you need. EPR is one instrument. You need taxations, you need GST support, a lot of these things which requires the Ministry of Finance, economic department to actually work together. This is how NITI Aayog facilitated the transition in India. There are these 11 committees which were set up again in March this year, and they started in, as I mentioned, in 2017 with the RE strategy, which was released. That was the kind of a kickoff of circular economy discussions in India. And now we have this entire 11 committees working across. So I would say we have to wait and see what action plans come out of these committees. 4 of the ministries, Ministry of Mines, Ministry of Steel, METI, and Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs had their strategies in 2019. As a project, we also supported to work with them. And these are available with NITI Aayog. Now it just needs to be taken up with these 11 committees. And then, of course, the business models have to come up through working with industrial associations, with private sector directly, so that you actually have a robust mechanism. Because I think finances will always be a challenge, but then it needs an entire, I think a facilitating role, which NITI is playing quite interestingly in the country.
Right, and our Prime Minister also launched something called Global Housing Technology Competition, GHTC, under Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, especially looking into these dimensions. Nishi ma'am has also worked on the same, and there has been a lot of focus since last year. Some of the meetings I have also attended in NITI Aayog. And what do you think at decentralized level, state level, district administration level, the circular economy which you are highlighting, what is the progress there?
Yeah, so in 2017, I mentioned we released the RE strategy. Once that was done, it was mentioned that a lot of things are state focus. States only can implement certain directions, like mining and other issues are state related. So that's how we actually started to do trainings at the state level on this RE strategy and its implementation. And during that conversation, we had Odisha, we did Bhubaneswar, then Telangana, and Goa, 3 of the states which we did, considering mining states, production, and all of that. And 2 of the state governments actually came forward to design state strategies on resource efficiency and circular economy. So Goa has a state strategy. That was the first state to have it. And it actually considers the economic parameters quite clearly. That's how I said working with NITI actually was able to facilitate economic, social, and environmental agenda together. So the circular economy strategy or the resource efficiency strategy in Goa actually talks about tourism as one of the key issues. This was released in February 2020, and post that we had the pandemic. So of course, tourism as a sector is badly hurt. But they also had other issues like construction and demolition waste, which is also coming up with entire tourism influx. You also have all these larger demand for construction materials. So that was the other issue. And the third was marine litter plastic. So this was largely for Goa and its implementation. We also received some requests from other states to actually support this entire policy formulation. And even Ministry of Environment was quite keen to support the state level, because as I mentioned, SDG is a state reporting. But if they don't report on circular kind of the entire SDG 12 with that holistic view, you would still get state numbers which talk about hazardous waste generation and all of that. So I think that's what is interesting and is a development, at least in the last 3.5 years. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, ma'am. Nishim, do we have any other question? Some people are also raising hands. I'm trying to Chitranjali Tiwari. Are you there? I'm trying to unmute you. No? Chitranjali?
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead. Kindly be brief.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. The hand was raised by mistake, I think. So sorry.
No problem. Okay. That's okay. Great.
There is a question. Any specific training course is conducted for promoting circular economy culture in our country? If it is, kindly share.
Ashish sir has many presentations. Okay. Ashish Chaturvedi, Circular Economy, GIZ. One will get many presentations. And ma'am, would you like to add anything on materials on circular economy, or if you can share, we can also circulate.
I will share. I'll share. I think I mentioned about our website also. There's a lot of, like, as I mentioned, is available. And currently, since you're mentioning Ashish, we are actually doing a project which is on marine litter. It's actually focusing on circularity in plastics, the ocean plastics. How can you actually track the leakages from land? I think one of the questions was on land. So how do you actually look at the entire reduction of land related generation of this plastic waste, like leakages to plastic waste in the riverine and in the coastal ecosystems. So this is what we are doing, and maybe I think we'll have some certain results to share working across on that as well.
Great. Shamala ma'am,
yeah, very nice to listen to you, Rachna. It was very informative. I just had one question, this whole thing about PROs, don't you think we should take it a little forward now, that PROs are able to collect quite a lot, whether it may be in e-waste or in plastic waste, that there should be greater research and also greater effort for recovery, especially in e-waste, greater effort for other metals recovery and other rare earths recovery. We are not putting in so much of effort, perhaps. I was just wondering.
Yeah, no, I think the PROs currently work on the mandate with their producers. So if the brands are actually just looking at the role of PROs largely on collection, on fulfilling the targets, which is largely collection and recycling. So that's where I think currently the licenses to the PROs have also been issued. And of course, I think graduating them to be recyclers is always questionable, because I think we have seen the status of recycling also in India, the monitoring as well as how it's being handled. So I would say that's a big challenge. The e-waste strategy, as I just mentioned, with Niti Aayog and Ministry of IT that is there, it has a lot of things which are quite forward-looking currently, where, as I mentioned, we have seen a lot of industry reluctance on accepting it. And in fact, today itself, there's another task force meeting happening to actually look at how do you revise this entire thing. And this committee is set up with all the CMA, MATE, like all the different consumer electronics. So I think there's a lot of thing on circularity across globally. PROs is part of this committee. They're also looking at how do you actually look at better EPR implementation, because I think collection target, more or less, they will be able to meet. The challenges on technology, the challenges on informal sector leakages, which is where I think we need still a very strong enforcement and capacities with the different actors to be, I think, improved, enhanced on.
Great, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rachna ma'am, for putting this all together in a very short notice and for this very excellent presentation. So with that, we have come to wrap of this training session. And lastly, we'll have Anil sir to give a wrap about this training program, very extensive. And today, Jyoti Parikh ma'am, Professor Modak sir, and Rachna ma'am has spoken. And everyone was missing you, Gupta sir, about NIDM. They spoke. I will share the recording. So without any further ado, over to Professor Gupta to give his concluding thoughts and how our those who are getting this training can strengthen the agenda of NIDM and IMPRI towards this training which we are doing, disaster resilient waste management for sustainable spaces. Anil sir, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Arjunji. And I could listen to some part of the deliberation by Dr. Rachna. In fact, all the resource persons and speakers, as I told on day one, have been my collaborator, and we had the opportunity to work together under some projects at some or other time. So this has been really a wonderful program. And as I was referring on first day also, during the inaugural, that now we need to change the thought process of focus on our infrastructure resilience. And in fact, the small scale infrastructure dealing with waste management, dealing with water treatment, I think these aspects are also very important. And that we try to highlight in this 3 days program. And the deliberation covered from the dimensions of the industrial sector to urban areas to the household issues. And Dr. Rachna was focusing on the e-waste related issues. So I think all the important dimensions have been covered in this program. But yes, I do agree that it is not always possible to come out with all the answers. But equally important is to come up with the questions. So many of the questions have already been answered in this program, but many of the new questions have also come up. And I think the new questions are very important for further thought process and further improvement in our planning, our actions, and that generates the wider scope for the next level of discourses as well. So this is very important contribution from this joint team of IMPRI and NIDM, and I must compliment Dr. Simi, Dr. Arjun, and Ms. Fatima and others from NIDM who have worked together and planned this 3 days online program. Had this been a face-to-face event, certainly it would have facilitated much more detailed uh, discussions, and many more topics or the many more speakers could have been accommodated or been invited from a wide array. But here also we could invite very important and very learned resource persons. So I am thankful to all of them who took out their time and joined this program and shared their knowledge and experience. And I am also thankful to all the participants. More than 300 or even someday it was more than 450 participants were there. And this shows the interest on this subject. And the subject is something which is not frequently talked about. But that is the need of the time, because when we really want to emphasize on the public health resilience, urban resilience, and environmental resilience at one go, and as we are party to this SDGs and Paris Climate Agreement and SFDRR during the same period, that is up to 2013. So I think there is a scope also, and there is also a need that we have to look at the integration opportunities and also the co-benefits among these. And this kind of themes where we are looking that how the waste management facilities should not only be established or put into operation, but they should also remain functional during emergencies and disasters. So how to integrate disaster resilience into our waste management systems. And when we talk of the systems, then it starts from the source to the final disposal. So the entire cycle with all the stages, how do we look at various kind of the perturbations that can be brought by various kind of climatic, non-climatic, geological, and other anthropogenic hazards, and then we look at that how we improve the situation. So thank you very much to all of you who made this event a success. And good to see you, Rachna. And I'm very happy that Dr. Modak was there. I could miss out his lecture. I will see the recording and will certainly go through all the lectures. Thank you. Good to see you, Rachna.
Thank you. Good to see you, sir.
Over to you, Arjunji.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anil sir. So many people have been asking about the certificate. Fatima and NIDM IT team will enable that. I would request again and again that kindly be patient because this is a pandemic time. Even IT team have family, so sometimes glitches and other thing comes, and no need to get hyper on a weekend. It's a off day. So please be mindful of what you're doing. I will quickly tell you all that how to get the certificate. So in our event page, Nishi ma'am, you can share the link in the chat box. You will go there, you will see all the details. We have also uploaded PPTs by each of the panelists. Some people would edit and send it, no problem, but within some time, these will be updated. And all the videos are also there, as you can see. And when you go below to the page, all it is also written how to get that, how to register, how to generate certificate. NIDM team have also prepared a video so that one can see and download it. There is also a user manual for the same. We have uploaded it also on our website. One can see step by step all the pictures and everything is taken here. One can see and then download. So after this event, database would be updated by the IT team. You'll just have to go there, and there you'll find a feedback link which you have to click. That's towards the end, and then you'll get certificate. Feedback link, you'll fill the feedback link, and then when you come back again to the page, then the certificate will be generated. In case there is any problem, NIDM team will assist, but I will again request all of you to kindly be patient with these processes. So with that, I think it's clear. It's time for a vote of thanks. Thank you, everyone. Now I hand over to Nishi ma'am to give a quick vote of thanks quickly.
Thank you, sir. So in these 3 days, we have tried our best to have this training program as engaging as possible by having experts from various sectors related to waste management. Overall, it has been an excellent learning experience for all of us, and I hope you all must have gained a lot from this 3-day online certificate training program. I would like to thank all our eminent panelists from today's and previous sessions: Professor Jyoti Prakash, Executive Director, IRADE; Professor Prasad Modak, Executive President, EMC; and Dr. Rachna Arora, Team Leader at GIZ. From yesterday's session, Dr. Brijesh Dubey, Associate Professor, IIT Kharagpur; Ms. Swati Singh Sambyar, Waste Management Specialist, UN Habitat India; Professor Sunil Pandey, Director, TERI, the Energy and Resource Institute; Professor Shyamal Almani, Senior Advisor, Public Health Foundation of India; Mr. Harshit Berde, Director, Swachh Pune; and Professor Anil Kumar Gupta, Head ECD RM, for sharing their valuable insights and knowledge. I would also like to thank Professor Anil Kumar Gupta, Head ECD RM and IDM New Delhi, for his support and guidance throughout. It means a lot, sir. I would also like to thank each of the participants for joining this training program and congratulate you on behalf of IMPRI and NIDM for making this investment in your professional and development and learning. I would like to thank Ms. Fatima Amin of NIDM for her sincere efforts in conducting of the program and managing feedbacks and certificates. Last but not the least, sincere thanks to all the colleagues at IMPRI and NIDM for putting this program together. Thank you so much. Please be safe and have a good day.
Thank you.